Of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board of Appeals is a 9-person volunteer citizen board appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. Our procedure this evening is as follows. First, we will hear from the Planning and Development Services Unit, represented tonight by John Barrett and Matt Kowalski. Then the petitioner or his or her representative will make his or her presentation. Petitioners will have 5 minutes in which to make their presentation. The board members may ask questions of either the city or the petitioner. We will acknowledge any written comments received by the board. We will allow an appearing party to express their support or objections. The board will discuss the appeal and formulate a resolution to approve the appeal. 5 affirmative votes of the board will be required for a variance to be granted. Finally, any qualified party who is aggrieved by a decision of the board can appeal that decision to the Washtenaw County Circuit Court on a timely basis. Roll call. I am here. Mike Daniel?
Here.
Dave?
Here.
Mike Dobmeyer?
Here.
Nicole?
Here.
Todd? Heather?
Here.
Kirk?
Here.
Julie?
Here.
We have a quorum. I will briefly welcome Julie Weatherby. She is our newest member to the Zoning Board of Appeals. She comes to us from the Planning Commission, so she's our Planning Commission liaison. So welcome, Julie. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Motion from Kurt, support from Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the March 22nd meeting. I know these came in later than the rest of the packet, so if anyone's had an opportunity to review these, we can approve those tonight. Otherwise, we can postpone those to the next meeting if anyone would rather do it that way.
Well, I just reviewed them. It looks from the minutes that we didn't approve the February ones either. Is that true?
Oh, I don't know.
That we postponed the February minutes?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't remember from the meeting, but as I was reading the minutes, that was one of the first things that,
I think I recall them not being available at that time.
right. So, I mean, we still have to approve the February
Approve
minutes.
those, yeah.
But I'm comfortable with the March minutes, and if others have read them, or if they haven't, I think we'd maybe do the February and March maybe off the top at the next meeting. And then everybody will have a chance to read them.
Okay, so we'll postpone the minutes.
But we should let the staff know that we should see the February minutes so we can,
Did we approve February at last month's meeting?
according to the minutes that we
Well,
have.
this is March, so there's still a month.
Yeah,
April
but
would
the
have been the
approval
last.
of minutes on the February meeting, it says postponed until the next meeting.
Right, but I think we did that in April, and these are the March minutes.
Oh, I see what,
Yeah.
so we're a month behind.
Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So we still have the April minutes to look
Yes, we'll get the April minutes next month.
at. Okay.
Minutes.
I'll move to approve.
Support? We have a motion from Kurt. Do we have support to approve the minutes from Heather? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, moving on to hearings and appeals, ZBA 17-017302 Pauline Boulevard. John?
I'm John Barrett, zoning coordinator for the city of Ann Arbor, and I too would like to welcome Julie Weatherby to, as our newest member of the board. Thank you for your service. If anyone here is tonight is for the 1260 Furdon case or the 431 Highland case, both of those petitions were withdrawn, so they will not be heard tonight. Moving right along, the first case tonight is ZBA 17-017. The address is 302 Pauline Boulevard. Lee Hollander, property owner, is requesting a variance from Chapter 55 zoning, Section 5:59, subsection 1C, accessory buildings. The owner seeks to construct a new detached garage on the existing foundation. The zoning ordinance requires a 3-foot setback from the rear property line. The variance request is for less than 3 inches from the required setback, thereby allowing the new detached garage to be located at a total distance of 2 feet 9 inches from the rear property line. The subject parcel is zoned R1D, single family, and the lot is 3,800 square feet in area. The new detached garage will be 20 by 18 for a total of 360 square feet on each floor, with 2 stories for a total of 720 square feet. If you'll follow along on your monitors, the first slide is the location map. The property is highlighted, and it's just west of Main Street on the north side of Pauline. You'll see the aerial map and its relationship west of Main Street. Next slide is a zoomed-in aerial of the property. You see the existing garage is right here at the pointer, and the residence is right here. This is the survey that was submitted with the application. You can see that it's approximately 3.5 inches off the rear property line. This is the proposed elevation that was submitted, looking at it from the front of the north side, looking to the north. This is the left side elevation, the right side elevation. First floor plan proposes to be an existing garage where the vehicles will be parked. And on the second floor is going to be storage and just an open space with a half bath. These are photos that I took when I was out at the site. You see the subject property, see the residence, and the relationship of the garage to the right. Close photo of the existing garage that will be demolished. This is looking toward the east on the west side of the garage. You see the rear of the garage right here, and then the adjacent garage of the abutting property. This is looking to the west of the garage, excuse me, to the east of the garage, on the west side still. This is the east side of the garage. This is the east side of the garage as well, looking to the left of it. Another photo on the other side, looking in its relationship to the abutting garage and the subject garage. That's the foundation that the applicant is proposing to build on, directly on top of the existing foundation. That is the conclusion of staff's presentation. I'll take any questions at this time.
Thanks, John. Any questions for staff? Dave?
So John, the proximity of these 2 garages, is the neighbor's garage essentially on their lot line or pretty close to it?
I'd say, well, they're both non-conforming for sure. They both
Right.
don't meet the rear setback. And I think due to the fact that they were built in the 40s.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have, the house I moved out of in 1999 had a garage built right on the lot line back in long ago.
Yeah.
But what I'm looking at here is, looks like, because they're essentially still almost 3 feet off their lot line, then the other garage must be almost right on the lot line.
Exactly. It's either on it or real close to it.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, if the petitioner's here, if you could, oh, sorry, did you have a question, sir?
Just really briefly, is that chain link, the chain link fence, is that on the subject property?
The chain link?
The cyclone fence in the photos? That's on the property that we're considering, right?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. And is that conforming, that, the placement of that fence?
The fence can go up to the property line, so
That could be on the property.
it would be on it. Mhm.
Got it. And, okay, understood, thanks.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, if the petitioner's here, if you could please step forward, sign in, and state your name for the record.
Sure. My name is Lee Hollander. I am the property owner along with my wife at 302 Pauline. Am I supposed to sign in somehow?
Yeah, there should be a
Sorry,
sign-in sheet.
I apologize, I was late due to traffic getting here.
Oh.
Okay.
If you have a presentation or anything you would like to make, otherwise,
I think it's been pretty well stated. I think it's a fairly obvious request. I mean, are there any questions for me in terms of the property or what I'm asking for? Sure.
Heather?
Is it just the rear foundation? It looks like there's no dimensions on the existing garage. Are you using the entire foundation, or are you actually making it deeper?
My intent, my request is to maintain the rear foundation exactly in its location. And actually, the rest of the perimeter will be in its existing location too. I would like to add 2 feet to the front of the garage to make it extend 2 feet in the other direction.
So it's actually 18 by 18 now, and you're...
Currently 18 by 18, the goal would be 18 by 20.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Mike?
So the footprint you're mentioning, 18 by 20, that is not including the exterior stair, or does that include the exterior stair?
That does not include the exterior
Okay.
stair.
And how wide would those stairs be?
3 feet.
Okay, thanks.
Questions for the petitioner? Okay, thank you.
All right.
Is
thanks.
there anyone from the public here to speak on this petition? I will note that we have one letter of support from Wendy Ramsden Gage at 305 Pauline Boulevard. There's no one here to speak, then the board is in discussion. Heather?
I had a very similar situation and was granted a variance a number of years ago, so I have no objection to this.
Dave?
I think it's quite reasonable to allow them to use the existing foundation for essentially a couple inches of variance, and I'm going to be supporting this without any questions.
Any further discussion or a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Dave?
Petition ZBA 17-017, 302 Pauline Boulevard. Variance. Based on the following findings of fact and in accordance with the established standards for approval, the Zoning Board of Appeals hereby grants the following variances from Chapter 55, Section 559(1)C, accessory buildings, to allow, 1, a 3-inch variance to allow a new 2-story detached garage to be constructed 2 feet 9 inches from the rear property line. A, the alleged practical difficulties are peculiar to the property and result from conditions which do not exist generally throughout the city. B, that the practical difficulties which will result from a failure to grant the variance include substantially more than mere inconvenience, inability to attain a higher financial return, or both. C, the variance, if granted, will not significantly affect surrounding properties. D, the circumstances of the variance request are not self-imposed. E, the variance request is the minimum necessary to achieve reasonable use of the structure.
We have a motion. Do we have support? Support from Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Variance is granted.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to ZBA 17-015, 1420 East Stadium Boulevard. Matt?
Thank you. Okay, subject parcels indicated here in the crosshatch, located on the corner of East Stadium and Packard. It is zoned, it actually has a split zoning. It's not shown on this map. It's zoned C3, and the western third approximately is zoned P. We'll be able to see that a little bit clearer on one of the next photos. Here you can see an aerial photo of it, zoomed out a little bit. You can see the relation to the single-family residences to the west as well as to the south. You can get in a little bit of a closer view. Okay, so the petitioner is here before you. They're requesting 3 variances. I'm going to read through the variances first, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. The first variance is a variance from Chapter 55, a variance of 21.8 feet for, in order to construct a building within the rear setback. The required rear setback is 30 feet. When a C3 normally has, well, I shouldn't say normally, and unless it abuts a residential zone, C3 has a 0-foot rear setback. However, obviously in this case, it does abut a residential zone, so that does require a 30-foot rear setback. The second variances are from Chapter 47. These variances are for the curb cuts. There's curb cut on Stadium Boulevard, as well as a curb cut on Packard Boulevard that is proposed. The maximum curb cut width by code is 30 feet. They are proposing 35 feet for both of the curb cuts. The third variance is a variance from Chapter 62, which is our landscaping section. That variance is for a conflicting land use buffer to reduce the distance of the conflicting land use buffer to about a minimum of 8 feet. That is I say minimum because it's in this area right here. Basically, there's a triangle due to the curve of the angle of the property line. You can see here the the conflicting land use buffer goes with that. Conflicting land use buffer is required anytime you have a use like a commercial use adjacent to a residential use. That conflicting land use buffer is required to be 15 feet. So you can see they do maintain that for the majority of the subject parcel here. They have, right in here is where it's about 140 square feet approximately of encroachment into the conflicting land use buffer. The variance for the landscaping is just from the distance, it's not from the landscaping. They do maintain the required amount of landscaping along that property line. So conflicting land use buffer is both an area, or basically a width, that goes along there, as well as minimum required landscaping in that area. So landscaping is being maintained, however, the width obviously is not in that part. So the petitioner is proposing, obviously there's an existing gas station on the site right now. The petitioner is proposing to demolish that and replace it with a approximately 4,000 square foot convenience store gas station. You can see it's located obviously on the southern section of the site. The zoning that I spoke of earlier, you can kind of see it on the photo here. There's a line that goes right here. That's basically the zoning line. To the west or to the left as you look on your screen is a P zoning, which is a parking zoning. The only thing allowed in a parking zoning is parking. And to the right is a C3 zoning. Within that C3 zoning, you're allowed most commercial type uses. Further, another issue with the P zoning, there is also a deed restriction that was placed many, many years ago on that P parcel, which states even if it were to be rezoned to C3, there can be no structure placed on that section of the parcel. So that is obviously has an impact on where the building or the canopy can be constructed. So that covers building, canopy, any structure, any structure. So that limits where that building placement is going, forcing forcing the orientation of the building, as we're going to see. I'm going to go through a couple of alternative plans. This project, you can see in your staff reports, there's quite a bit. I've included quite a bit of information. The petitioner, as well as neighbor staff, have been working on this project 2-3 years maybe. It's at least been submitted for a good 2 years plus on many different iterations of the plan here. We've had a couple that have gone to Planning Commission, and the one that you see here obviously is the last one that went to Planning Commission. It was recommended for approval, however, it is contingent upon any variances being granted. This is a landscape plan. You can see in a little bit more detail so the trees that are being planted are generally, you can see kind of the darker circles here around the edge. There's landscaping along the front as well, but that's not subject to the variance. But in the back, you can see numerous evergreen trees that will be planted along that rear. They are saving as many trees as they could under this design. We're going to go to some alternatives here. As I mentioned, this project's been considered many, many times, and there are many considerations that fall into play with this. The deed restriction is one. There are some safety issues that were another thing. We have code requirements on a site like this. There is a minimum and there is a maximum setback in the C3 zoning. The minimum is 10 feet as a front setback, the maximum is 25 for a front setback. So as far as design on the site, it makes it challenging with the zoning along this side, basically where you see this line here with the P zoning, of siting a building on there without encroaching either into that parking easement or the easement area that you cannot build on, or going into the rear setback. What we have is, these are different plans that have gone before the planning commission, or, well, actually, I shouldn't say planning commission. These have been different plans that the petitioner has worked on to try and get the building to fit within the zoning, as well as addressing concerns. Some of the previous versions, there's 2 versions that have went to planning commission previously, and one of the, it's actually in your packet, I don't have it up here, was one of the last versions, which pretty much was, let me go back. You can see here, so this is a plan that could be constructed by right. It places the canopy and most of the vehicular, well, all the vehicular activity to the rear of the site. The plan that was before planning commission in February or March of this year, I think, had a building along this location right here, which is essentially kind of creates a building that requires 3, almost really 4 fronts. You're gonna have, obviously, a front that's gonna be facing the gas station circulation area over here, as well as you're gonna have some building frontage directly along Stadium. As far as activating those fronts, that is an area where planning commission went back and forth. There's also, rather than just having a blank wall, whether the windows can't necessarily create 3 doors on each side or windows lining the entire building for safety, security issues. There's also concerns regarding traffic and circulation there. Visibility, there's, as you can imagine, there's a large amount of pedestrian traffic in this area, as well as bicycle and obviously vehicular traffic. The safety concerns were for the pedestrians as well as bicyclists and motorists entering and exiting the site. There are 4 existing curb cuts. Go back. Actually, there are 4 existing curb cuts now. There are obviously 2 of those curb cuts will be removed, so they're cutting the number of curb cuts in half. I'll go through some photos of the subject site here, so this is the southern boundary of the existing gas station. Obviously, is right here to the right. Be moved closer. It's going to be within 10 feet of the sidewalk here, and then it's kind of along that line, approximately right there. Much of this tree would be remaining under the proposed. Some of the landscaping, the trees along that line do need to be removed, but again, they will be planting mitigation trees in their place. This is looking towards the southwest corner of the site, a little bit closer in there. These trees will be remaining as well. And this is looking back towards the east. As part of, also mentioned, as part of the site plan, they are proposing to construct a minimum, well, a fence of varying height, but close to the street, it'll be about, it's gonna go down, I think, 4 feet due to code, but it's going to, right behind the residences, it's going to go up to 8 feet, and then I believe there's a section that's going to go up to 10 feet to help screen the activity that's going on at the gas station site. Go back to the site plan and make sure I covered all the, we'll go back to this one. So again, going back to limiting 2 curb cuts to the site, we did have the traffic engineer review. The curb cut variances are something that have been granted to other projects in the past, just due to our curb cut standards. The whole chapter 47 is being reworked as we speak to adjust those. They've acknowledged that the 30-foot curb cut doesn't work for a lot of trucks, basically, or buses, things like that. So they could probably make it work with the 30-foot curb cut. However, they're going to end up driving over landscaping as trucks pull in and out of the site, and possibly cars. In this case, where you have stride traffic, the traffic engineer did support the variance as they were proposed. Chapter 62, as I mentioned, the Chapter 62 variance, as I mentioned, all the required landscaping will be provided. The wall that will be installed along the southern buffer. The variance request was reviewed by the landscaping staff, and she did support the variance request for the landscaping. For the Chapter 55 variance, for the rear setback, they, again, as I've mentioned previously, the petitioners worked on many different versions of this plan. They have met with the planning commission staff as well as the neighborhood many, many times to get a plan that they feel would work for everybody, that minimizes the impact to the adjacent residential neighborhood, as well as accomplishes a safe and effective plan ultimately for Circle K and all the neighbors and customers of the facility. So as it would this plan has been the planning commission. They did review it. It was recommended for approval, of course, contingent upon the variances being granted tonight. Given the site constraints, public feedback, planning commission staff reviews, this is a variance that planning staff would support. And that concludes the presentation at this time. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Any questions for staff? Kirk?
Thanks. There was a mention in here about the deed restriction, until such time the deed restriction is released. This is more a point of curiosity than impacting tonight, but how does that happen, and was that considered for this?
I'm probably gonna deflect that to the petitioner. I know it was quite a complicated process. I understand there's many, many parties to that deed that was recorded way back when. So, it's a valid question, and we may refer that to the petitioner when they step up.
Thank you.
Dave?
So there's fencing on both the south and the west side?
Yes, yes, I don't think I mentioned the west side, but that's correct. There is.
And what's the fencing on the west side going to be, similar to the south?
The west side, is that 6 feet or 8 feet along the western?
I could ask the petitioner.
8 feet up until the distance for safety for the neighbor.
Yep, exactly. So then it has to be right near the curb, basically the sidewalk. It does need to decrease for visibility.
Any other questions for staff? Kirk?
In terms of I'm sure this was covered at Planning Commission, but in terms of the lights that, are there lights affixed to the south and west walls of the building, and how are those directed?
Yep, there's an emergency light, or it's a light that's in this area. I believe it's like right here. There are no lights along the rear, I don't believe, because there's no exits and there's no doors along the south or the east. But there is a light, just kind of a wall-mounted light above the door here that's required for safety, ingress and egress right there. And we do have a pretty extensive photometric plan that was submitted with the project as well.
Thanks.
Questions for staff? Okay, if the petitioner could please step forward, sign in, state your name for the record.
Good evening, Scott Munzel with the law firm of Pierce, Sperling, Egan and Daniels, representing the petitioner Circle K. Also with me tonight are Rich Lawrence from Circle K and Todd Quattro and Rihanna Zakowski from Quattro Construction. So as you heard, we're here requesting 3 variances. Just, kind of a fun little zoning theory. Obviously, the zoning ordinance is drafted kind of in the abstract by people sitting at desks and coming up with a 70-page volume. But when those regs are applied in the real world, sometimes they create situations that are not ideal or in the best interest of the community, and so that's why the zoning board is a relief valve, if you will, for those kind of situations. And so that's what we've got here. It's a little bit unusual, but when you apply the zoning regulations to what Circle K is trying to do and you apply them to this site, you actually would create a site layout, a site plan that really would have unnecessary negative impacts on the adjoining property owners. And so we're trying to avoid that with a plan that does require some variances. As you heard, there has been a significant amount of community outreach. I think Circle K has met with community members probably 5 times over the last several years. There have been a lot of iterations, a lot of design attempts to meet a variety of competing needs for safe circulation on the site, for a variety of different things, but of course, trying to minimize the impact on the neighbors to the south in particular. The planning staff has worked with Circle K, and so this is a plan that we think really does the best for everybody. We also believe we meet the standards required for the 3 variances. Just to go back through them, first, we need the site variance from the rear yard setback. Essentially, you know, you do have an unusually shaped site with 2 split zonings and the deed restrictions on the west that basically make a kind of trapezoid-shaped property in which you're trying to fit square-type buildings, if you will. The deed restriction also is a deed restriction that pre-exists or predates the zoning regulations, and it basically limits what can be done there. The only way that could be released or discharged is it would require a signature of a certain number of people in the immediate area, which was, I think it's 60% if not higher. But that would to allow it to be used for other commercial type purposes, and it seemed very unlikely that we'd be able to reach that threshold to try and remove that, and it would still, of course, have the unusual zoning. So in any event, if you strictly apply the zoning regulations, you would get a site plan that would put the bulk of the activity on the south side of the site, closer to the residences. And so it's kind of unusual because the practical difficulty is not really for the petitioner, it's really what happens to the neighborhood, because it creates this undesirable impact on the properties to the south. And so there would be a practical difficulty and created by the strict application. Substantial justice, we think that the folks, the neighbors, will be protected appropriately by this different layout that you've got in front of you. And as you heard, there's a bunch of letters in support in the record. This landscaping buffer, again, if we went with the site layout permitted, it would have an undesirable effect on the neighboring property owners. As the staff mentioned, all the landscaping is being installed. It's just that in that little triangle, the width is slightly less. More importantly, the petitioner is installing a more significant fence than would be required under the rules. They actually did a site or a sound study, and we expect that the sound leaving the site will be 50% lower than what is there today. So we're pretty confident that it'll be an improvement for the neighbors. And so the goals of the landscape buffer will be met. And then finally, the third variance is for the curb cut width. And essentially, it's our position that the regular curb cut width would actually create difficulties in maneuvering and conflicts between vehicle traffic and pedestrians, so that it's safer actually to have the wider curb cut width. And as you heard, they would be eliminating several of the curb cuts, so that would also enhance the public safety. So we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Nice timing.
Any questions for the petitioner? Okay, if there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this, please step forward, state your name.
Are we allowed only one representative, or do we get
Each individual.
Each individual is allowed 3 minutes.
Very good, thank you.
Good evening. My name's Lindsay McDivitt. I live at 1419 Iroquois Place, which directly borders on the Circle K gas station property to the south. I've been involved in advocating for a neighborhood-friendly site plan since the planned rebuild was first brought up at the first public meeting about 3 years ago. So while I strongly regret the necessity for providing Circle K zoning variances, this alternative plan is vastly preferable to the neighbors to the by right site plan. And it does improve pedestrian and bicycle safety at that busy intersection. Like, that's the one gain that we have had. I'd ask that the ZBA grant the requested variances. I'd like to state my clear opposition to the by right site plan presented to the Planning Commission last fall that puts a new building on the northeast property with its back facing Packard. With the alternative plan, I'd just like to share, we do have continuing concerns about nuisance light and nuisance noise, especially this lighted pump canopy over 8 pumps that will be lit all night. Regarding noise, we have a lot of concerns about ads and music and so forth that's going to be playing from the speakers when cars pull up, and possibly some other exterior noise. And I just would like to state that my concerns about Ann Arbor and future development include this kind of juxtaposition of light activity, traffic from businesses next to residences. It's far from ideal. We are grateful for the 10-foot wall that we will be getting, that will improve it. But we'll still be looking up at the lights at the bottom of the canopy that's 14 foot high at the bottom of it, and we're 2 feet lower than the Circle K property. So it's still of a great concern, but thank you for your service to Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to speak on this?
All right. Good evening. My name's Garrett Scott, and I live with my wife Betsy Davis and our daughter Lucy at 1421 Iroquois Place, also directly behind the proposed redevelopment site of the Circle K. I stand here to urge the ZBA to grant the variances to allow the Circle K to build their proposed new convenience store into the residential buffer in the southeast corner of the parcel. The proposed site plan that places the building in the buffer zone is a compromise between the developers and the neighborhood and offers a workable way forward for the new Circle K. This compromise, I want to emphasize, is the result of a robust 3-year conversation between the neighborhood, Circle K, the builders, city planning staff, and the planning commission. So given the determination of the developers to enlarge the footprint of the new convenience store, and given the constraints of the site that you've heard reviewed tonight, it appears quite likely that if this variance were not granted, the Circle K would choose instead to place its new building on the northeast corner of the parcel with the lighted 24-hour storefront facing residences rather than facing the commercial activity and the gas pumps out toward Stadium Boulevard. So again, I want to echo what you heard from staff tonight and what you heard from the petitioners, that by granting the variance, the placement will provide some screening from the light and noise to the adjoining properties on the south. The traffic light and noise of the site will be moved away from the adjoining houses. With the proposed variance in front of you this evening, the placement of the curb cut on Packard relative to the building placement provides more visibility to exiting trucks and cars for the pedestrians. And finally, the neighborhood supports granting the variance. Each of the 6 immediate residential neighbors to the Circle K has expressed their support to Planning Commission for the site plan with the buffer zone variance. The ample correspondence in the packets for the March 7th Planning Commission meeting, for the May 2nd Planning Commission meeting, and in your packet tonight gives you some idea of the wider neighborhood support. And finally, while I cannot speak for all of my neighbors, I've been involved in numerous neighborhood meetings and hearings for this proposed redevelopment over the past 3 years. And I'm happy to do what I can to answer any questions board members might have about neighborhood perspectives on the proposed variances. So I thank you for your thoughtful consideration in granting these variances.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to speak on this petition?
So my name is Jill Schlaff. I'm at 1423 Iroquois. And just for reference, where we live is between the building and the property is the closest that the building will come. So we're the second from Packard. So we're like right there. And I'm supportive of Garrett and Lindsay and everything they've said. But the main reason I'm here is for these 2 guys back there. Where'd the other one go? I'd like to embarrass them. Say, wait, hi. Going out there? Say hi. And the reason being is that they walk to school every day. They walk home, bike, and safety has been my main concern with the plans from day one. And the by right plan was the worst that I have seen because it had no visibility. And so even though that our property is the closest when it comes to the setback variance, I would be much in favor of that as opposed to, because it does provide visibility for the bicyclists and the pedestrians going forward. I support the variance because of that. The by right plan blocking basically all visibility for pedestrians and children and bicyclists was just, it's not something that I think the ZBA would like to see in this particular spot. So as someone that's being so close to the variant and so close to the building, I hope you take into consideration my opinion that I support this plan much, much more in favor of the alternate plan, which would, I think, based on the fact that we walk to school every day, would really present a safety issue for pedestrians and children in particular. So that's why I'm here. And I hope you approve the variance for the setback, and I guess there's 3 total, all 3 of them. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments from the public? I will note we received letters of support from several neighbors in the adjacent neighborhood. All right, we're in discussion. Dave?
This could be for both the staff and the petitioner. Why didn't this go through as a PUD? And then just go, I mean, it's been worked on for a long time and gone through planning. It just seems like PUD would address all of these issues at one step.
It could, but there wouldn't be, it's not enough to justify a PUD. They wouldn't have, a PUD has to provide public benefit. It's a much more complicated process. I don't think they would need a PUD. They need one. It's a much more, we wouldn't even really have considered it. PUDs are more meant for larger, different mixed-use projects like that than this, saying because of the 3 variances that are being requested. Yeah, staff did not recommend a PUD in this case.
Okay, I'd like to just clarify why I'm asking that. And my fear is, this is the ideal solution, I think, for the community with, for a gas station. Because a gas station has all that drive-through traffic and the gas pumps and everything. But once we grant this variance, and this is a question for staff, and I've seen gas stations, 4 gas station corners become 2 gas station corners although this corner was never a 4 gas station corner. There have been 4 gas station corners that I've seen become eventually no gas station corners. Once we grant this variance, couldn't some commercial entity build the parcel up to the variance line and up to the street line anyway for some non-gas station use?
Yeah, if this project went away, then correct. I mean, the zoning would put most likely any building closer to the corner of Packard and
But
Stadium.
what I'm saying, we grant this variance, 10 years from now, this parcel gets sold to another commercial entity that's not a gas station,
Mhm.
and they can use the
existing building.
reduced setback that we've granted on that rear sideline, and use the 0 setback at Stadium and Packard. So they have a much larger footprint that they're able to build their commercial structure on in the future. And that's why I say that maybe the PUD would have been the better solution to lock this in, and then if somebody wanted to come back and convert the use from a gas station, they alter the PUD and restore the rear setback. I'm really happy with the work that's been done with working with the community, but it just raises a planning question to me about the future use of this lot.
Good question.
And if the petitioner wants to respond.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting comment. I just thought I would mention 2 things. One, my impression is Circle K is making a fairly significant investment in this property. So I think that the thought that it would not become a gas station would be a pretty long time period. I mean, I think that the concern or the potential danger is not very likely. The other thing would be, even if someone did redevelop it, it would still have to comply with all the the C3 requirements.
Parking requirements, buffer requirements.
They'd have to have a new site plan, and so they would still have to comply with, I mean, you're right, they might be able to reuse that part of the building, which would they'd be able to have that advantage, but the rest of the site would still need to comply. So it may not be that large of an advantage ultimately. But it's an interesting point.
Any other discussion? Kirk?
Guess I'll say for my part, having been through the so-called area height and placement process for commercial buildings on corridors like this, the rationale for the zoning calling for most of the buildings to be up to the street, I think, is a good one, except for situations like this. So I think it's appropriate to discuss this because it's sort of an anomaly. First, it's sort of a standalone commercial corner. It's not part of a row of commercial properties. And the other is that it's a fueling station. So it's going to be auto-centric by necessity. So it makes more sense to me to have the circulation be closer to the street and have the retail set back, in addition to all the benefits to the neighbors, which is the reason why we're here. But this seems to be just one of those cases that's perfectly appropriate for the ZBA. So I'm glad that there's been a productive discussion, even though it took a long time, that it's worked out this way.
Julie?
Yeah, having gone through a couple of the votes in the planning commission, the by right project on this is really not ideal. And I had the same concern about the, if we change this now, what happens in the future? But things I could see in the future, what if it's a florist? What if it's a coffee shop? What if it's none of those things seem to be a bad situation to have the back of a building near residence, just because that kind of removes the commercial activity from somebody's backyard to have the back side of the building. It didn't seem too bad, and considering what the options were, I think this is really a much better scenario than if we didn't have variances, and I think this is exactly why you would provide variances, is in a case like this. And I think it's nice to see that everybody has worked together in some harmony to get to this point, because I think this is a much better scenario than what could have been done by right.
Thanks. Any further discussion or motion? Dave? Oh,
Oh, I guess
Heather?
I do have a question. L3, the lower, or the left, right-hand, plan neighbored want to see, shows the building at a slight angle. So I'm assuming it maintains that buffer. And it looks like there's a semi drawn there trying to make a tight turn. And I'm wondering why the curb cut is there, and could that plan have worked? Could the building be at a slight angle with a curb cut in a more appropriate location for that? I just wondered why that one was rejected.
It's none of those.
Which plan?
it's on sheet L3.
You guys want to see what it is?
Oh, yeah, I see it, I have it.
Hi, I'm Rihanna Zatkowski with Quacha Construction, the designer engineer for the site. The angling the building, as you see on L3, that would only solve the answer in regards to the landscape setback variance. It does not it doesn't affect the 30-foot building setback. As you can see, we have even more of the building in that 30-foot setback on L3. And the reason for the driveway being that far down was that was a direct concern of Planning Commission at one time, to get the
driveways as far away from the corner as possible.
I guess I have a general question. I would be curious as to why, what were the positives about this plan versus the alternative plan that's been proposed to the neighbors? It seems like it's listed as a plan that the neighbors would like to see. I'm curious as to
That is
why
just
that was the
my,
case.
that was a previous rendition that they wanted us to check and
Okay.
see if it worked. The one that we are currently forward with is the one they want
Okay.
ultimately.
So as a follow-up, the plan that we're looking at, being requested to approve, has the curb cut much closer to Stadium.
Yes,
So,
and
and that's, than the plan neighbor wanted to see.
in
on L3.
versus L3 versus L6, yes. That driveway, it is further south on Packard than what the existing conditions is. And it's enough that allows for the circulation on the site to be most effective. We have to have, as Matt was saying, the 10-foot or the 25-foot building setback requirements. And to do that, we couldn't lower that driveway any further.
So I
And
guess,
if
fun-
you-
sorry, go ahead.
If you look at the L6, that shows you the previous version that the neighbors were all mentioning, the by right, versus our currently proposed. And the by right is just what we can do without any variances.
Okay. I guess, to my eyes, the main difference between the plan shown on L3 and the plan that's the alternate plan is that the building appears to be on an angle. Other than the driveway.
Yes, that's most of it. We are additionally out of the 30-foot setback some, but now,
Okay.
also, no, it's not. It's this one. No, it's not.
I guess the only point that I would make on that is if for some reason there are neighbors that feel that having the building on an angle more towards the corner is preferable to having it kind of parallel to Stadium, then that would be something that I'd want to discuss a little bit more. And the only thing that's informing me in saying that is the fact that there's the label speaking to the fact that the neighborhood is interested in the plan shown on L3.
And I guess I would just say that the Planning Commission has already recommended approval for this plan with the building parallel to Stadium, so I don't know all of back and forth that went on with Planning Commission, but I'm assuming there was some reason
Discussion
why
on that,
they
yeah.
decided to go with this plan and not that plan, so I'm not gonna second guess it at this point.
And I could just, if I can add too, there's some of these like that, just to comment on that, those are versions that were also prepared much earlier than this. I mean, the neighbor,
Got it.
we're getting there, and there's additional staff review that goes in. So some of these plans that you see here wouldn't create a whole host of other issues too on the site, not just for Circle K and its functions, but its code requirements as well. So some of those labels are kind of just,
Okay.
they're like historical as we
You
went
showing your
through.
work, yes.
Like that, I think was
Okay.
prepared probably when we had that by right at the corner, and then slowly we're saying, well, that plan doesn't work because of this, and then it brings us to the point like where we're at now. So we've gotten, but I just put those in there as kind of a historical reference to see what works. I mean,
Got it.
yeah.
Thanks.
An evolution of the plan, I guess, as you could say.
Any further discussion?
Oh, what was this that was coming around with some
Oh, that
hand
was
notes?
her,
It's a written summary
That's
of
a
the
written
first
summary of her
public
presentation.
speaker's
Oh, okay,
speech.
including the handwritten
Yeah, if you just want to pass it down, the city can put it in the file. Dave?
Just as a matter of discussion, I intend to vote for this. I think the developer and community have worked together to come to a resolution. My preference, I just want to state for the record, would have been that the planning department handle this as a PUD, and it never would have come to us, and it would have retained the rear setbacks as part of, or, I mean, it wouldn't like do away with these rear setbacks in perpetuity that some future user of the site might be able to take advantage of. But given what we have and a resolution between the developer and the community, I'm in support of that, and I will be voting for this.
Any other discussion or a motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Petition ZBA 17-0115, or 15, 1420 East Stadium Boulevard. Variance, based on the following findings of fact and in accordance with the established standards for approval, the Zoning Board of Appeals hereby grants the following variances. First, from Chapter 55, Section 546, C3 fringe commercial rear setback. A 21.87-foot variance to allow a new building to be constructed 8.13 feet from the rear property line. A, the alleged practical difficulties are peculiar to the property and result from conditions which do not exist generally throughout the city. B, that the practical difficulties which will result from a failure to grant the variance include substantially more than mere inconvenience, inability to attain a higher financial return, or both. C, the variance, if granted, will not significantly affect surrounding properties. D, the circumstances of the variance request are not self-imposed. E, the variance request is the minimum necessary to achieve reasonable use of the structure. Second, Chapter 47, Streets, variance. The Zoning Board of Appeals shall have the authority to interpret this chapter and may, in specific cases involving practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, grant variances or exceptions from the requirements of this chapter, providing such a variance or exception is in harmony with the general purpose and intent of this chapter. A variance of 5 feet is requested to allow driveway widths of 35 feet, normally maximum of 30 feet, for 2 driveways on the site. A, the variance requested is in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the requirements of this chapter. And third, Chapter 62 variance. Upon an appeal filed to the Zoning Board of Appeals in accordance with the procedures of Chapter 55, a variance may be granted from the strict application of the provisions of this chapter in cases involving practical difficulties or hardships when the evidence supports that the public benefit intended to be secured by this chapter will exist with less than the required landscaping or screening. A variance of 2 feet from Chapter 62, landscaping and screening, to reduce a portion of the conflicting land use buffer to a minimum of 8 feet. A, the public benefit intended to be secured by this chapter will exist with less than the required landscaping buffer width.
We have a motion by Dave. Do we have support? Support from Kirk. Mike Daniel.
Yes.
Dave.
Yes.
Mike Dobmeyer.
Yes.
Nicole.
Yes.
Heather.
Yes.
Kirk.
Yes.
Julie.
Yes.
I also vote yes. Variances are granted. Moving on to new business. We have no new business. We have no unfinished business, reports and communications. We dealt with all the correspondence as part of our appeals. Public commentary. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on anything? No? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Kirk, support
Second.
from Dave? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.